Hi everybody and welcome to our apprenticeship service webinar. My name's Nick Duff from the service engagement team and I'll be doing the hosting for today's session. So today we're going to be looking at the apprenticeship unit funding rules for 2026 to 2027 and this session is for both employers and for training providers. Please remember this session is for the apprenticeship unit funding rules and the regular apprenticeship funding rules webinar is going to be held on the 17th of June. So hopefully you all managed to register for that session when you registered for this one. And when you're registering for the webinars, many of you will have spotted the questions that we had around off-the-job training. We put those in there so that we could design a specific off-the-job training webinar based on your comments, and we plan to release that in July. So can I say a big thank you to all of those of you that took time to share your insights on off the job. It's been really helpful for the guys that are putting that content together. And I'll do my usual reminder if I can and tell you that the webinar is being recorded today, and I'll remind you that by registering and attending that you're giving your consent and that you're agreeing for the webinar to be both recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube channel. But if you feel that you've changed your mind regarding that consent, can I ask that you dial off? As for the recording, I'll tell you how you can access those in a little while, a little bit later on. So hopefully you'll all notice that you've automatically been placed on mute and you'll stay on mute for throughout the webinar. Whilst we go through the webinar today, the plan is that we run through the apprenticeship units funding rules, and in particular we'll look at the context of why we're doing apprenticeship units, some of the policy, and we'll look at the rules going right through from eligibility for units all the way through to payments. And then after we've covered all of that, we'll go into our Q&A session. Once we're done with the Q&A, I'll tell you how you can access a handout from today's session, which will have all of the key links that we'll be referring to during the webinar today. So if you've got questions for the presenters, what I'd like you to do is pop them into the questions tab. You can find that on the control panel. That should be on the right hand side of your screen. If you look for the heading called questions, if you click on that, you can put your questions in there. We'll try and cover as many of your questions as we can, and we'll certainly aim to cover all of the main points, all the key points that you raise, even if we don't get around to answering each individual question. And the guys have committed to take away the unanswered questions and put together some clarification points and send those out after the webinar as well. The funding policy team will also be reviewing all the questions that you submit, and they'll take your thoughts and insights into account when they continue to review and update the rules on an ongoing basis. So today's session, I think we've not done a full run through of the content, but we're expecting the session with the Q&A bit as well will last for around 60-ish minutes, so around an hour today. And can I also remind you that at the end of the session, as you leave the webinar, we always put up a short survey, and we'd really like to know what you think about today's webinar. So please do take just a couple of minutes just to answer a few quick questions and provide us with your feedback. So for the session today, I'm joined by Seb Aslam and Kate McDonough. They're both from our apprenticeship funding policy teams. They'll be doing the main input today on the rules, and we'll also pitch in with supporting the Q&A session as well. So a big welcome to both of you. And I think, Seb, I'm coming over to you to kick off.
Thanks very much, Nick. So as you said, I'm Seb Aslan. I'm a senior manager in the funding policy team within DWP, and I've been responsible for coordinating the development of the apprenticeship unit funding rules. So if we could move on to the next slide. So I just want to start by setting out a little bit of context. So with the introduction of apprenticeship units, we're aiming to provide greater flexibility and choice about how the apprenticeship levy funds can be spent through the growth and skills offer. So that's the objective, and meeting that government objective. And we continue to offer high quality apprenticeships, obviously, that unlock economic growth and break down barriers to opportunity. But this is sort of another string in the bow of the growth and skills offer. The apprenticeship unit is a targeted, flexible program designed to upskill employees in critical skills areas, and the content from apprenticeship units is taken from existing knowledge and skills within the existing occupational standards. By undertaking an apprenticeship unit, the learner should gain the knowledge and skills that they need to be productive in their current or in a future job role. So we published version 1 of the apprenticeship unit rules on the 15th of April. And this version included changes that we made following feedback that we'd received on the draft version of the rules that we published in March. And I just want to sort of just highlight what we can, what we'll be focusing on today, what we can cover and what we're not covering in today's session. So today's session will focus very much on the funding rules. We'll try to draw out any kind of differences in particular with the apprenticeship funding rules, but we won't be covering today the APAR process for approving providers to deliver apprenticeship units. And we also won't be going into detail or covering the funding rates for apprenticeship units that have been set based on advice from Skills England. If we could just have the next slide, please. So just to, again, a little bit more context about how we've approached the apprenticeship using funding rule, the apprenticeship unit funding rules. So we've purposefully kept as close to the existing apprenticeship rules as we can, and this is to ensure that they're familiar to providers and employers, and also that we're using tried and tested approaches. So that's a kind of an overarching principle that we've adopted. But there are some key differences that we'll highlight, and these key differences have kind of been adopted to reflect the shorter nature of apprenticeship units. And there are particular differences around the assessment approach, delivery hours, and the funding approach. And I mean, just wanted to highlight also that this is a new approach. It's a new program, and we'll be utilizing a test and learn approach to apprenticeship units. So we'll be looking at what's working, and we'll be reviewing that, and we'll also be reviewing where there might be problems and what we can do about that. But overall, the introduction of apprenticeship units is about meeting the government's pledge to increase the flexibility for employers in their use of the apprenticeship levy through the growth and skills offer. And I suppose just also a word on our intentions in the future. Clearly, we have a separate set of funding rules, albeit similar to the main programme. We'll be looking insofar as we can to kind of simplify the rules within the overarching growth and skills offer. Okay, so just that kind of set out the context. Just to highlight a bit more specifically what I'll be working through with colleagues this afternoon. We'll cover initial assessment and eligibility. We'll talk about the duration of apprenticeship units and delivery hours. We'll talk about the assessment approach, the payment milestone approach, and the approach to learning support. And in those three areas, there are some differences from the main apprenticeship programme. And as I say, as we go through, we'll really try to draw out those differences so that they're clear for you. Next slide, thank you. Starting with eligibility for apprenticeship units, and I would just highlight here that the eligibility rules are very similar to the apprenticeship programme, but there is one key difference in the age criteria. So before enrolment, providers need to confirm that the learner is eligible, and that learner must be age 19 or over at the point that the apprenticeship unit starts. They must be employed, and the employer must have identified a specific upskilling need. The learner must be working at least 50% of their time in England, and there are some exemptions from that rule, which are again the same as for apprenticeships, and in fact they are listed in the Annex A of the main apprenticeship funding rules. The learner must start on or after the 28th of April 2026, which is when the programme went live. The learner must have enough time to complete the apprenticeship unit on their current visa or on their employment contract. Again, a rule which mirrors the apprenticeship programme. And again, the learner must not be on certain other government funded skills provision, and that is set out in the same way as it is for the main programme. So I'll now move on to the initial assessment, or the other areas of initial assessment. So recognition of prior learning is not dealt with in the same way as it was for apprenticeships. It didn't seem appropriate to amend the amount of hours provided based on prior learning for such a short course. So we have a simpler sort of assessment criteria in that learners are eligible to take an apprenticeship unit provided they do not already have 50% or more of the knowledge and skills covered within the unit. Providers must carry out a light touch check and record evidence that the learner is below that 50% threshold. But this is likely to be in the case of sort of a proportionate approach in the case of apprenticeship units. So it's likely that this could be a simple conversation that's recorded rather than a full skills scan. Employment arrangements, the provider must verify that the individual is employed and working under a contract of employment that is long enough for the learner to complete the apprenticeship unit. But as with the main with the apprenticeship programme, we have also made sure that constables of English police forces, ministers, trainee ministers who might not be working under a contract of employment are specifically eligible for apprenticeship unit, as are prisoners. An assessment of the learning support need of the learner also has to be conducted as part of the initial assessment, and learning support is available in the case of apprenticeship units. Okay, so I'll now just touch on the duration of apprenticeship units. So again, the kind of overarching feedback that was received from employers was that there was a real need for short, focused courses designed to meet specific skills gaps, and therefore apprenticeship units have been designed along on that approach. Each unit must be delivered over between 1 and 16 weeks. Obviously, the planned duration of the apprenticeship unit must be sufficient to deliver between 30 and 140 delivery hours in line with the planned minimum delivery hours, sort of which is on the unit on the Skills England website. And the planned duration must allow the learner to complete the unit and undertake the required skills test within the agreed time frame, and we'll cover the skills test a little bit later on. So delivery hours, and I said I'd kind of draw out where the rules are different for apprenticeship units to the apprenticeship program, and delivery hours is one kind of key difference within the apprenticeship unit program. It is different from off-the-job training used in the apprenticeship program. So what are delivery hours? Well, they are hours delivered by the tutor and received by the learner during the learner's normal working hours for the purpose of achieving the knowledge and skills of the apprenticeship unit. Those delivery hours need to be planned in advance and clearly recorded in the learner's training plan, and I'll come on to the training plan in a moment. The delivery hours require the learner and the tutor to be in the same physical space or virtual space, and that is the kind of key difference between delivery hours and off-the-job training. It needs to really be tutor delivered time. So delivery hours can include the teaching of theory, practical training, project work, can also include one-to-one coaching and tuition, for example, kind of delivery of the learning support elements. But self-directed study, independent learning and unsupervised activity cannot be counted as delivery hours. So one change that we made to the apprenticeship unit rules following feedback on the draft is we have clarified that where a scheduled session is missed and therefore the learner is missing delivery hours because they were unavailable for unexpected reasons, where appropriate, the learner can be given the opportunity to catch up on those delivery hours, for example, through watching a recording of the session. And I'll now just talk a little bit about the training plan, which is very similar to the training plan within apprenticeships, although clearly it will be proportionate to the amount of to the content covered. The provider must agree a training plan with the learner and the employer. And the learner and the employer must have the opportunity to contribute to the training plan, and it must be agreed before any training is delivered. The training plan must confirm that the apprenticeship unit being delivered must confirm, the apprenticeship unit being delivered and set out the planned start and end dates of the unit. It must also include the planned delivery hours and describe how the unit will cover the skills and knowledge contained in the unit. The training plan must outline the planned training activities and how the delivery will take place, and confirm that all delivery will take place within the learner's normal working hours. And also, if throughout the training any changes to the training are applied, so to, for example, the delivery duration or delivery hours, then the training plan must be updated to reflect these. So I'll come on now to assessment of the apprenticeship unit, and I would highlight at the outset that assessment is an area where there is quite a significant divergence from the apprenticeship programme, in that training providers themselves must ensure that a skills test is carried out for every learner, and that skills test needs to confirm that the learners acquired the knowledge and skills set out within the apprenticeship unit. The providers responsible for determining the format of the test, agreeing the approach with the employer, and setting out all of this detail within the training plan at the outset of the training. Now, again, we recognise that not all providers might have the expertise to develop that assessment, and therefore providers have the choice to either design and administer the skills test, or to commission an external specialist, such as an awarding organisation, to design it for them. Or where there's one available, they could purchase an assessment which would test the knowledge and skills set out with that apprenticeship unit. There is also within apprenticeship units the option to extend the assessment by using a non-mandatory qualification, provided that aligns with the knowledge and skills within the apprenticeship unit. Okay, so I've set out the kind of how the assessment, or who's responsible for what within the assessment. I'll now talk a little bit about what we expect within this within the assessment of the apprenticeship unit. So that assessment must be transparent, reliable, consistent and accurate. It needs to be robust and proportionate to the learning outcomes. We also expect that there would be a significantly large bank of question or varied task to prevent the learner being able to predict what's likely to be in the skills test. And it needs to be refreshed periodically to sort of maintain the integrity of the test. It should be designed to ensure a valid assessment of the skills and knowledge within the apprenticeship unit. So, for example, where practical skills are being learnt, the test should test that practical skill. And the provider and employer must agree the assessment approach used to ensure that the learner has acquired the knowledge and skills within the apprenticeship unit. And then we also expect a certain amount of validation from the employer. So we expect that the employer and learner will confirm that the training plan's been delivered in full and the skills test has been passed, and that the learners acquired the new knowledge and skills required to apply in their current or future job role. Okay, so I will now touch on the payment milestones, and again, I would highlight the fact that the payment milestone approach is another area of difference from the apprenticeship program. And I suppose just a little bit of context about the thinking that's gone into the development of that. So the payment for apprenticeship units based on achievement of defined delivery milestones rather than monthly on-program payments. Clearly that is quite different. The reason it's different is to reflect the short nature of apprenticeship units. So an on-program payment for an apprenticeship unit which is delivered over a much shorter time than apprenticeships, and we expect there to be a lower dropout rate. So that's just the context. The funding is released in two stages, linked to delivery and then to completion. So milestone 1, which accounts for 30% of the total cost of the apprenticeship unit funding rate is payable once the learner's been fully onboarded and undertaken 30% of the planned delivery hours associated with the unit. And milestone 2 is payable, and that's 70% of the total cost of the apprenticeship unit funding rate, and that is payable once the learner has completed 100% of the planned delivery hours and a successful outcome has been achieved within the apprenticeship unit. And successful outcome means that the learner must have passed the skills test and the employer and the learner has signed the training plan to validate that it has been delivered satisfactorily. And at this point, I think I'm handing over to my colleague Kate to take me through the next section. Thank you.
Thanks, Seb, and afternoon, everyone. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So for employers who do not pay the levy, there are two key differences to the main apprenticeship programme. Government will fully fund all starts, regardless of the learner's age, based on the advertised funding rate on the Skills England website. Non-levy employers can either access funding by a levy transfer or by reserving funds. When reserving funds, these must be reserved prior to the apprenticeship unit starting or within the same calendar month. You are not able to backdate any reservations. So, for example, if the training starts in July, funds must be reserved either in May, June, or July. You cannot reserve these funds in August. The reason for this is due to the nature of it being a shorter training programme, with some units potentially being 1 week in duration. For employers who pay the levy, the co-investment rate is in line with the main apprenticeship programme. However, the difference here is that the payments, mentioned in the earlier slide, are not linked to the collection of the employer contribution. It is down to providers to liaise directly with the employer regarding this outstanding balance, so i.e. the 5% employer contribution. So moving on to learning support. So the assessment and eligibility for learning support remains the same as the main apprenticeship programme. Providers will still need to undertake an assessment to identify the learning difficulty or disability, the reasonable adjustments that would be required, and confirmation that without these being put in place, the learner would not be able to complete their apprenticeship unit. Claims can only be made upon evidence that the assessment has been carried out, along with a copy of the assessment results, which identifies the learner's learning difficulty or disability. Evidence of details of the reasonable adjustments that are necessary to enable the learner to complete the apprenticeship unit they are enrolled on, and a description of how progress towards the completion of that apprenticeship unit would be directly impacted if the reasonable adjustments listed were not put in place for that learner. Providers will need to document evidence of how they plan to deliver the necessary reasonable adjustments throughout the apprenticeship unit. This plan has to be agreed and signed off by the learner prior to a claim for learning support funding being made. Where learning support funding is claimed, the provider must evidence and document details of the necessary reasonable adjustments that have been delivered. Learning support funding will only be paid where the reasonable adjustments are required, are being delivered, and a cost has been incurred. The key differences for apprenticeship units is that learning support is a fixed £150 amount. If the reasonable adjustments cost more than this, then providers will need to go through a separate claim process, which I'll go through on the next slide. Also, learning support claims can only be made once the first delivery milestone has been achieved. So that is when the 30% of the planned delivery hours have been completed, as mentioned on the payment milestones slide. So how do you claim learning support for apprenticeship units? So this is different to the main apprenticeship programme, and I will go through a couple of examples. Where the reasonable adjustment costs £150 or less, then the claim for the full £150 fixed amount is done via the earnings adjustment statement. As mentioned in the last slide, the earliest this can be claimed is when the first milestone payment has been reached, and this is assuming that the reasonable adjustments have been delivered and a cost has been incurred by this point. If the reasonable adjustment is not being delivered until later in the training, the claim can only be made once the adjustment has been delivered. The earnings support statement will not have separate funding lines for apprenticeship units, so providers should record this as if it is excess learning support using the equivalent funding line for the main apprenticeship programme. Where the reasonable adjustment costs more than £150, then the claim process differs depending on what the reasonable adjustment is. If the reasonable adjustment is for support staff, so for example, a British Sign Language interpreter, then as the actual costs for these won't be known until the programme finishes, as we know that these may vary throughout the funding period, then the claim process for this is as follows. Providers can automatically claim for the first £150 via the earnings adjustment statement, as per the process that I've just talked through. Providers will need to submit an estimated cost claim form, and this should provide us with a reasonable idea of the potential total costs. We will review this claim and contact you to confirm approval. But please note that any estimated costs will be subject to affordability checks at the final claim submission. So once the learner has completed their training, or at the point they leave the programme, providers will need to submit a final actual claim form. And this is to confirm the full amount of the costs that have been incurred. Once reviewed by us, if approved, then the amount that will be processed will be the total claim amount minus that fixed £150. Payment will be made at the next available pay run, and providers will be informed of this by letter. If the reasonable adjustment is for material costs, so for example a specialised laptop, then as the actual costs are known straight away, the claim process for this is as follows. So again, providers can automatically claim for the first £150 via the earnings adjustment statement. Providers will then need to submit an actual cost claim form for the total costs and provide evidence of this cost. We will review this claim and contact you to confirm approval. If approved, the amount that will be processed will be the total claim amount minus that fixed £150. And again, payment will be made at the next available pay run, and providers will be informed of this by letter. Claim forms will need to be submitted via document exchange, and more information on this, along with the additional guidance, can be found on the gov.uk page that is shown on the slide. The evidence requirements for claims can be found within the apprenticeship unit funding rules. I'm now going to hand back to Nick. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you very much, Seb. There's a lot of content that you've gone through there with people. We've had lots of questions that have come in as well, which is really good. So lots of stuff for us to have a look at now. A couple of more generic things that have come through. So lots of employers asking where to find the details of providers who are delivering the apprenticeship unit. We've got a link of the handout which we'll release in a second. We'll make that available in a second to find apprenticeship training. So if you go into Find Apprenticeship Training, you can search for the providers that are delivering specific apprenticeship units. And if you want to find more details about the apprenticeship units and what they contain themselves, the guys have already mentioned the Skills England website. We've got a link to that as well. So yeah, a link to Skills England where you can find out details of what's in the units, and a link to Find Apprenticeship Training where you can find the details of the providers that have committed to deliver. Obviously, that process of getting providers approved to deliver these units is still ongoing, and more providers will be adding their details on in the coming weeks. But yeah, so they're the ones that have done that already. They're there and on Find Apprenticeship Training as we speak. Lots of questions, or lots of feedback actually, about different types of units that you guys would like to see added into the list of approved units. We won't go through each of individual requests for those in the Q&A session, but what we will do is we'll take all of those suggestions and put them through to so Kate and Seb's team, through the funding policy team, and they can have a look at those as part of sort of user insight, user demand for particular types of units. So we'll get the funding policy team to review those for you. So if we can look at specific questions now, if we can go through some of those. Question for you, Seb, if I can. When you mentioned the apprenticeship unit technical funding guide, so somebody's asking when that's going to be published.
Yeah, thanks very much, and good question. So we're just in the final stages of sort of finalising that. Hopeful that it will be published this week, at the very latest. I'm hoping at the very early next week.
Okay, I've got loads of questions for you, Seb, so just keep off of mute for a second. There's a question about, are units intended to be APL'd? I'm assuming that's accreditation of prior learning. So APL'd into a full apprenticeship standard. So if somebody does apprenticeship unit, can they then claim that in if they go on to do the full standard?
So in terms of the kind of the assessment that we've used for apprenticeship units, so because it's not an independent assessment, then the individual would need to be assessed for within the apprenticeship for all of the knowledge and skills for that apprenticeship. But clearly, if they've got the learning, then that would need to be taken into account.
Okay, and a similar thing in terms of, can an apprentice who's already live on an apprenticeship also be enrolled upon an apprenticeship unit as well?
So the answer to that isn't so. No, you can't undertake an apprenticeship unit if you're undertaking an apprenticeship, and you cannot also undertake more than one apprenticeship unit at the same time. So you would have to complete the apprenticeship in order to enrol for an apprenticeship unit. And if you're already on an apprenticeship unit, you would have to complete that before enrolling on a second apprenticeship unit.
Okay, cool, thank you. And then just a question about how long the learner needs to be employed before they qualify to go on an apprenticeship unit.
So there's no specific requirement in the rules for them to be employed for a certain an amount of time. The rules around employment are that the individual their contract of employment must be long enough for them to complete the apprenticeship unit.
Yeah, okay. And there's just a couple of others on eligibility, particularly around you mentioned the 28th of April, so people starting on or after the 28th of April. Is that around starting employment, or is that starting learning?
So that's starting learning.
Okay, cool. And then there's also a question about the 3-year UK residency. Is that still required for a learner doing apprenticeship units?
So the residency rules that are valid for apprenticeships are the same for apprenticeship units. So the ordinary residency requirement stands for apprenticeship unit.
Okay, thank you. And keeping with you, that's the same question. It's the 28th of April question. If there is if a visa has an expiry date, but the contract of employment is permanent, and the learner sponsored, are they eligible, or is the visa expiry date the deciding factor?
So an individual would have to have enough time remaining on their current residency in order to complete the apprenticeship unit.
Cool, thank you.
So the visa would be a deciding factor in that case.
Thank you. And then just confirmation around types of contract for learners, or for employees. Would a person under a fixed term contract be eligible for an apprenticeship unit?
So an individual with a fixed term contract would be eligible to take an apprenticeship unit, provided that there is enough time on that fixed term contract for them to complete the unit. So in other words, if there's a 5-week apprenticeship unit and the learner has more than 5 weeks from when they start on the unit on their fixed term contract, then that would be okay. But if they have less time remaining, then they wouldn't be eligible.
Okay, thank you. Kate, a question for you. The question is, do individuals need an EHCP for learning support? And then could you also explain what an EHCP is, please?
Yeah, so they can have one, but with regards to learning support, providers, as part of the initial assessment, must look to see if a learner does need reasonable adjustments, as if they've got a learning difficulty or disability. So they can have one, but they don't have to have one. It's all about the evidence to suggest that the individual needs those reasonable adjustments linked to a learning difficulty or disability.
And the EHCP, what does that stand for?
You're testing me now, Nick.
Oh, I apologize. I'm looking at it thinking I should know this, and I don't.
It is an education, health and care plan.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you very much, Kate. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Again, question for you, Seb, if I can, around delivery hours. So do delivery hours need to be entered onto the ILR, which is the individualised learner record? Specification seems to imply that it's not required.
So as things stand at the moment, it's not required to enter the delivery hours onto the ILR. However, delivery hours should be recorded on the training plan. Okay,
thank you. And then moving on to RPL, which is recognition of prior learning. The question's saying, for the 50% recognition of prior learning coverage, is it a flat 50% of knowledge and skills? And then there's an example they put in there. But in terms of RPL, does the 50% RPL coverage, is it a flat 50% for knowledge and skills?
So, I mean, I think we might just take this one away and just provide a little bit more kind of detail. I did read that question. I think it is. I think it is a flat kind of 50% of the knowledge and skills within the unit. But actually, how we'll go away and maybe think about that and come back on the clarifications with how that's defined.
Okay, so in terms of the clarification, I'll say any key points that we haven't addressed today, and we hope we'll address most of them, but any that we don't, we'll issue just a couple of clarification points at the end of the webinar, once the guys have taken away all of the questions and had a look to see what's come in, and they'll craft a few clarification points, and we'll get those sent out in a short while after the webinar. A question again about the ILR, Seb, how in the ILR will the provider claim the 2 milestones that you mentioned?
Yeah, okay, so there is a specific LDM code which will trigger milestone 1, because as we've just touched on, the delivery hours aren't input onto the ILR, so there would be no way of knowing that milestone 1 has been reached without a kind of specific LDM code. So that's milestone 1. For milestone 2, basically milestone 2 will be triggered by the completion and outcome fields within the ILR. So once the training is marked as completed, once 100% of delivery hours have been undertaken, and a successful outcome, which is the passing of the skills test and the confirmation by the employer that and learner that the training plan has been completed. Once that has been received by the provider, then they can essentially record a successful outcome, and those two triggers within the ILR will mean that milestone 2 is paid.
Okay. On milestone 2 and certification, I think there's a couple of questions which I'll take slightly out of order. But what happens if the learner doesn't pass their skills test, or the employer doesn't think that the learning has been valid so far to pass the unit? Is there an option for, does the funding rule cover an option for resits or additional delivery?
So again, I think we don't cover it specifically. I think the intention is that a resit of the skills test is allowable, but we'll maybe again come back on that and just clarify that specific point.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of at the end, so if they've gone through hit milestone 2 and passed, the employer said yes, it's they passed, the learner agrees that they passed, that they've gone through and they've hit all the requirements of the unit. How does is there a certificate? Is there a unit certificate at the end?
We haven't sort of specified exactly what is required within the rules, but I think the provider can provide certification. I think this might be another area though where a little bit more clarification we could take away and provide that.
But nothing in the rules as a requirement at the moment that we know of.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Kate, a couple of questions for you around payments. So one, I think there were quite a few, and I think they might have come in slightly before you covered them. So in terms of payments, so for levy paying employers, from what I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's like 95% of the funding for the unit comes out of their levy pot, 5% is co-investment, which they agree with the provider to pay, and how that payment gets transferred. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, that's if they haven't got sufficient levy funds available to them in their account. So if they, if they've got enough in their levy pot, we take all of it. But if they've run out of levy funds, yes, we will contribute 95% of the funding band.
And then for non-levy employers, it's fully funded. Is that right?
Yeah. So for non-levy employers, it's fully funded, and this can be done either by reserving funds, as you would do for the main apprenticeship, or by securing a levy transfer, and that either can be done directly. So if you, as a non-levy payer, know a levy employer that you're wanting to work with, they can do a direct transfer, or you can go onto our gov.uk page where organisations will advertise levy funds that they are willing to pledge.
Yeah. So it still can be done for if you're an organisation, if you're an employer that doesn't pay the levy, a levy paying employer can still pledge funds to help support costs, but they're also sort of government funding available if they've gone through and reserved funding in the apprenticeship service to pay for the course as well, for the unit as well.
Yeah, and I believe it's the same process. So as you would go to reserve funds for the apprenticeships, it would be the same for reserving funds for apprenticeship units.
Okay, thank you very much. Seb, and the question started with apologies. So apologies, I may have missed this point, but is there a requirement for functional skills to be completed before attending one of the units?
So that there isn't a requirement within the rules for functional skills to be completed before going through the.
Cool, thank you. And then a question about training plans. So as the employer and learner have to sign the training plan to confirm that plan delivery has been delivered as expected, does it mean that training providers have to issue the training plan twice for signing, both at the start and also then at the end?
Yeah, so we would expect that a training plan is agreed with the employer at the outset, and then that the employer agrees that training plan has been delivered.
Okay, Thank you. And then Kate, go back to, I think learning support was one of the last slides you had. Why does the learning support claim get fixed at a single amount when the units vary from 30 hours to 140 hours? Because that could be quite a disparity between the difference of support that's needed to cover that time.
Yeah, so we had to choose a fixed amount. So within the main apprenticeship programme, it's £150 per month. So we've stick with the £150. But if the reasonable adjustment costs more, these can still be claimed. So providers won't be out of profit. As I mentioned, if it's, there's obviously the two different ways of claiming depending on whether it's support staff costs or materials. But yeah, if it costs more than £150, please submit the claim forms to us. So yeah, we will cover the costs basically if it meets all the eligibility criteria.
Cool, thank you. Seb, a couple for you again. Is there a limit on the number of units that an individual learner can undertake?
So there's no limit within the rules on the number of apprenticeship units that a learner can take. However, as mentioned previously, they can only be enrolled on one apprenticeship unit at one time.
Yeah. And then a question around English and maths. So I think some apprenticeship standards require an English and maths element to it. Is there a requirement for apprenticeship units for any English and maths requirement elements?
So there's no requirement within apprenticeship units for English and maths.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think we've answered that question. There's a question about levy transfer, which I think we've answered already. And I'm just scrolling down to see if there's any others. Yeah, that was one unit delivered at a time. That's okay. Right, off the job hours, Seb, if I can, is there a minimum off the job hours that need to be completed for an apprenticeship unit as per the main apprenticeship funding rules?
So we off the job we don't have in apprenticeship units. I covered a little bit when I was kind of going through the rules. We have delivery hours for apprenticeship units. At the minimum number of delivery hours for an individual apprenticeship unit is published on the apprenticeship unit on the Skills England website. So you can find the minimum amount of delivery hours associated with an individual unit on the Skills England website.
Okay, thank you. And Kate, I've seen this a couple of times. There's a question about the levy. So for employers that pay the apprenticeship levy, if they run out of levy funding and go into co-investment, is there a plan to increase the co-investment rate to 25% from the 1st of August?
Yes, so obviously the co-investment is across the board, so we will be reflecting the same changes.
Okay, thank you. And I think that is all of the questions that I've got marked. So thank you guys for answering so many of those. I mean, what I will just say is, so I've had a very quick whistle stop tour through all the questions. I think we've covered all the main elements. Is there anything, Kate, from when you've read through the questions that you think we haven't addressed that you'd like to respond to? And I'll come to you, Seb, for the same question in a second.
I don't think so. I've been trying to keep up with the questions, but I think we've covered everything about the co-investment, the levy transfers, reservations, and the learning support. There is obviously learning support guidance, as I mentioned, on gov.uk that we've updated. So I would suggest, and I think you're going to provide links to that, Nick. So I would suggest if providers are looking to claim that, then please read that guidance. Hopefully it's self-explanatory, but if there are any issues, then please just raise the queries in the normal way.
Okay, thank you. And Seb, is there anything you've missed? We think we missed in terms of a main point or a theme?
Again, I think mainly probably not. Obviously, there are a couple of questions that will go away and sort of provide a little bit more clarity on. I did see something popping up about kind of whether or not there's an ILR specification for unit. So what I would say is there is more information forthcoming imminently with the technical funding guide, which will cover the ILR, and apprenticeship unit is kind of current in its current form. It's it goes on to the ILR using funding model 99. Now that will change come August, where it will have its own kind of funding model. But that information will be forthcoming, as I said, hopefully the back end of this week or the beginning of next week in the technical funding guide.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm going to draw that to a close then, because we've got 5 minutes left. I will say that I've seen a couple of questions come in at the bottom saying that there's a few that we haven't addressed, and what we'll try and get around to doing is to go through those. I've tried to get the representative of all questions, but if there's anything we've missed, we'll get the guys to issue some clarification points, and we'll email those out after the session. But thank you for covering as many of those as you can, and thank you everybody for submitting the questions for that session. That's really helpful. Okay, if we can move on very quickly. Okay, so in terms of recordings, a lot of people have asked about recordings and when those will be available. What I want to do is just remind you about our YouTube channel, which is at DFE Sector Comms. As you will see on the screen, we've got 3 playlists on that channel. A recording of today's session will be available on the Apprenticeship Service webinar recordings playlist, and we'll have that available in about 3 weeks' time, once we've subtitled it and made it fully accessible. We will also have a recording available sooner than that on the webinar platform where you've registered, but I'll go into a bit more details on that in a sec. So also on at DFE Sector Comms, we've got playlists that cover support videos covering the different functions of the apprenticeship service, and they're in the using the apprenticeship service playlist. And we've got a couple of videos created to support the delivery of apprenticeships as well, available in the apprenticeship support videos playlist. Go onto that channel, subscribe, and if you click the bell icon, you get alerts when new content is uploaded. And then a final slide for me. So got a few links here as to where you can go to access further support, and that you should now be able to go to the handouts tab on the control panel and download a PDF document which has got those links on there, so you don't have to scribble them down whilst they're on the screen. So where I'll point you to for further support is have a look at apprenticeships.gov.uk. It's got lots of stuff on there for employers and providers, and also for young people as well, about apprenticeships and the apprenticeship service. For training provider colleagues, you'll know that there's the Further Education and Training Provider Community site, which is a peer-led discussion forum for providers. Lots of support available on there. To register for future webinars, I've included a link that you can follow as well to get to that point, which is the same place that you went to register. And by the beginning of next week, we'll also have the recording of today's webinar available from that link as well. So you'll be able to go on there, and that will stay on for about a month or so, whilst we make sure that we get the YouTube version subtitled and accessible and published on the at DFE Sector Comms YouTube channel. If you've got any specific queries about the apprenticeship service or some of the mechanics about how you add a learner for apprenticeship units, you can contact the support team. You can go to the self-service support tool, or you can email the support team as well. And then finally, I've given you the links to the apprenticeship funding rules document. I've given you the link to the Skills England website, and that's I said to you beforehand, where you can go to find out more details about what's in a unit. So you can investigate what a unit looks like, and then if you want to go and find the training providers that are delivering apprenticeship units, there's the link in there to find apprenticeship training, so you can go and have a look at those. And again, bear in mind that new providers are being added to that all the time, so that list will grow over the coming weeks. Okay, I think that's it. We are just about at time, so we're at the end of the session. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found that really useful. Thanks to my presenters for all of their inputs and insights. And remember, as you leave the session, could you please complete the short survey and tell us what you thought today. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.